Hey, LDH Sisterhood, welcome to our next segment. This month we are discussing men's mental health, and I'm so excited to be in the room with one of the people that I admire most. He is a mentor to my husband and myself. But Dr. Zain Reddiar is a dynamic and innovative professional, and he's a very rare specialist in the HR industry in South Africa. But more than that, he's also an internationally qualified coach with tremendous experience globally, especially across the African and Middle Eastern continents. Dr. Reddiar, we love having you on LDH. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, Kim, and just call me Zane, right?
I will. I love calling you Doc, but I will call you Zain. Zain, seeing as this is globally Men's Mental Health Awareness Month, and just given your rich experience across cultures and the corporate industry, as a coach, what are your observations about the state, if I can call it that, of men's mental health in South Africa?
Well, Kim, if you think about it, right, the first thing is that I only know that it's Mental Health Awareness Month for men because I'm a coach.
Yeah.
It's not public, there's nothing around it, and yet men experience these issues throughout. The second thing I think we must consider is the fact that while it's great to have a month that focuses on mental health because it helps employee wellness calendars and those kind of things, because you can focus on different things to raise awareness. It is something that affects men throughout the year, just like breast cancer affects women in every other month, not just in October. So I think that's the first two observations, is that there isn't an awareness around it. The second thing is that there isn't an accepting a spirit around that this actually exists. There's almost a stigma around that. And I think particularly in South Africa, where you have quite a diverse cultural background, you have a diversity of people and languages and cultures. It's just a melting pot of everything. In there, I think there's also this challenge around mental health and men in particular. And I think when we talk about, there's a lot of talk around genders and people have choice of genders. So I think maybe we should limit our discussion today to people who identify as biological male or biological female. And that is not exclusive. It would include gay and lesbian people who identify because they just have a different sexual preference. Because I think if we get into the gender discussion, it does complicate the discussion because I think there is so much more in that discussion that goes wider than that. So I think we talk people who identify as biologically male or female, and I can identify from that perspective in terms of the work that I do. So when we look at that, I think there's just the societal norms and the cultural norms that has such immense expectations of a man. And what is a man really, right? It's a definition that has been given to a certain gender, and that's because of a certain biological makeup. And I think because of that scientific name that has come into it, colloquially, we've now created this thing as to stereotypically, this is the role of a man and this is the role of a female. The female should be weaker, which is not necessarily true, and the male should be stronger. And it comes very much from also our both religious and cultural backgrounds, that these are the roles people play. The man is the defender, he can't be weak, therefore he can't do certain things.
Correct.
And when I sit in my practice and I meet with men and sit in the workplace and I meet men, I understand that there's a different dynamic. In the workplace, especially in South Africa, where you have the Employment Equity Act, where the roles of men are somehow watered down, so less credibility, even though they're experienced or otherwise. And we have this strong promotion of women, which is not a bad thing. I'm one of the promoters of that. But it does affect men. We put all this energy into driving women leaders. We put this energy into driving women in the workplace. All our focus is around women. It does make men seem slightly vulnerable, because it does say that we've now, we always talk about men and egos. It does chip away at the ego of a man suddenly finding himself vulnerable. The other part is in the social construct. If you look at the role of men, that has been watered down quite significantly. So women might be very powerful in the workplace. She might be very iconic in the terms of the emphasis that's placed on her because of her gender and probably her competence, and probably because her contribution. So there's all these factors that make women powerful. Women are powerful by nature, right? We know that. But there's this emphasis about almost bursting this up. And she plays that role in the workplace, but when she gets home, there has to be this balance, because she gets back into a space where she's in a cultural setting, she's in a local setting. And this is where I think the dynamics change, because suddenly she has to change that role and come back into the space where she finds herself now in a male dominant environment, because that's the social construct. And we can talk a little bit about that, but this is where men have this dilemma, because how does he engage with this woman that is suddenly blown up, gets this media expectation, get this professional expectations of her, and how does he then act and interact? Because in most instances, she has outgrown who he is. And I think this is where relationships are under strain, because we haven't taught people, there's no recipe book. We haven't taught that love goes beyond what I do professionally, how much money I make, how much I have a following on social media. It's very much about those two people, and we haven't given the care necessary for these people to find themselves. So in South Africa, I think men struggle from that perspective, both from a social and a professional construct. And I think the challenge is that there's the stigma that you shouldn't be in that situation. Men are supposed to be strong. Men are supposed to be having the answers. And what happens? Men find themselves in situations where they're unemployed. And that pressure of a man not being the breadwinner, where his wife is working or now nobody's working, puts men in. And what goes first? My mental health, or is it the fact that I must be this defender of my family, etc.? And the reality is that unless you take care of the mental health, you can't take care of anything else, because we are what we feel, right? Our bodies are very much in tune and linked into how we created. And the way our mindset has a definite impact on how we successful in life and how we work and live life. So that's probably just my view. I'm probably talking too much. Let me hear what you've got to say.
No, Zain, I was going to say to you, please carry on. I'll just let you talk for the rest of the time that we had together. But there was so much that you unpacked in that time. And I just want to touch on two things. And maybe the first one is because you have such established relationships, because of your other work in the church as well, across different cultures in South Africa. And you mentioned the stigma that's attached to men's mental health and men in particular. And I know we can't speak for all of our 11 cultures in South Africa, but just on a broad basis, what is that stigma that you see? And in your professional opinion, how have you helped men overcome that stigma to start the coaching and the self-work and the mastery? Because you did say that you find that the woman has outgrown the man, and I'm going to come to that after you answer this first question.
So I think the stigma is really about acceptance and about role playing and expectation of roles that are not necessarily there. They become norms and social constructs. It's something that we gave life to, and is not necessarily how it should be, right? Because nobody says it's a man's job to work and a woman's job to cook. It's just how we have socially been ingrained generation after generation. So what we're trying to do now is we're almost trying to undo in a short space of time what has been ingrained over multiple generations. And therefore we need to be patient. Okay. And I think patience sits at the core of this, and I think probably understanding too, because I think there is this thing about us trying to progress ourselves, but at the same time to progress at a pace that is acceptable, and it doesn't always happen like that. we'd love it to be in the the ideal world for it to be like that. The part around how I've helped people, I think I haven't helped it by working with men directly. My help has become through the education of women,
Wow.
more importantly, because it is women who are often more visible in society. It is women who are more open to the topic and more open to being amenable to alter their behavior to accommodate the pain that men go through.
Wow.
And so a lot of the work has been done through women as to where you find yourself, what is the messaging that's in your family, because you don't want to lose that family because you're this professional person, but you want your family to be empowered. You want your family to be strengthened through your own successes. And once they understand that, they then have a bit more empathy to what is happening around them. Because women are also mothers to sons, right? And they are wives to husbands, and they are sisters to brothers. And what is the role that a woman would play in this? So we would find in our societies that men are absent. And that's one of the challenges we have. The second thing is that hurt people.
Right.
So men go inside, and imagine you have a very expensive handbag and you take a piece of cheesecake and you put it in there. It's like your problem and you hope it goes away. It doesn't go away. It starts to ferment, it rots. And if you try to, reach for it in a few years, you'll probably die. It will kill you because it's toxic,
Wow.
right?
Quite a way to go.
So what you do with this now is that it doesn't only affect your mental health, but it also, when your mind is sick, your body becomes sick because we are so connected.
Yeah.
And this is the problem, is that how does it play out? It then plays out in our relationships. And therefore you see the kind of dysfunctional society that we have. And a lot of this stems from the mental health of men, where they come from environments and families where they're told, you must act in a certain way, you must behave like this, you must provide this, these are your roles. If you don't do this, you are considered to be an outcast or a failure. And those pressures of society are unnecessary, and they are probably conscripted from a generational curse of, just because I experienced it, I now pass that on. And this is exactly what happens. It plays out in the family, and we just keep perpetuating that. The mental health thing of men is about bringing men back and saying that it's okay. But we don't have, as men, we don't feel that we have enough patience shown to us by society, by the opposite gender, by our families, by our children, because everybody has this model that's been created of the ideal man,
Sure.
of this perfect man. And yet men are probably the weaker sex, right? Weaker in this way that they don't know how to, or I should say men don't know how to regulate their feelings and their emotions in a way that they can package it and show it, where women are far more stronger because they're able to just live through it and show it. And partly living through it and showing it is what makes you heal quickly, right?
Because that's what
Because
we've been taught to do. We've been
yes,
told
because
that.
pain is inevitable in life. I think we all will experience pain, and we'll experience it. We probably experienced it, and we will experience it in the future, and that's normal. It's part of the journey of life. It's the suffering that doesn't have to be.
Oh, I love that.
It's the suffering that brings the mental health bit in for me. It's the suffering that is in silence. It's the suffering that influences my reaction. It somehow brings me to a demeanor. And mental health is very much not just about the state of mind. It's also about the feeling of the body.
Mm,
And the two, everything's about energy, how we vibrate.
yes.
Our thoughts inform our actions. It informs our achievements. And when the mind is sick it makes the body sick, you don't have the energy to do that. If you're not in a space that where you not eating well and you're not getting the care that you require, and you don't have the endorphins released from the emotions that you feel around those who love you because you've become isolated. It's quite a complex and complicated situation.
Sure.
And one would go into these kind of things and understand that men really go into this isolation silo, and how is it that we can reach out to them,
That's
and
that's
how do
exactly
you
what I
live
wanted
it
to
there?
ask you. Is
Mm.
you said two things, Zain, that are probably linked. You said you have this empowered woman. She gets all this exposure. And I get so excited. I don't know if an hour is going to be long enough for us, but you know, she is this person in the workplace. And then trying to find, and I think men and women struggle with this, who she is because of those societal expectations. And culturally in South Africa, we still live to those expectations. The woman still bears the burden of responsibility in many cases in the household. Men still have that pressure, as you said. How do we as women then, and the other thing you said was that men feel invisible, and that's painful to you. It's painful because to some degree as women, we've contributed to that conversation. And the pendulum swings, doesn't it? Where we do come out of, and we are in a very still largely patriarchal world, but the pendulum must balance at some point. And we've got to change the narrative because as men and women, we complement one another. So while there is this focus on women, how do we create space for men to feel visible, to feel seen and heard? What do we do as partners if we're in a relationship, for instance? Yeah, I know that's complex, but that's the question.
There's a few things. I think we must go back to the nature of our creation.
Okay.
Right? And I think that nature of creation is, we've added all these things onto us, right? Our professions, our achievements, all things are added on. But at our core, what are we? We are vulnerable beings. We are beings who love being social. That's our nature. We are beings who love being loved. We are beings who thrive on positive experiences. Yet the pressures of life and work remove those and diminish those to a degree. And I think one of the things one needs to do is to start to unravel and separate that. And I work with a lot of professionals, and I can tell you the part they struggle with is personal mastery.
Wow.
The part they struggle with is the fact that they must understand that the more you go up in leadership, the more your EQ is required and less your IQ, right? And the more one becomes aware of that, there are various quotients that would make us rounded beings. And when we look at the quotients, you have obviously the IQ, which is the intelligence quotient. Then you have the physical quotient. Then you have the emotional quotient. You have the spiritual quotient. You have the cultural quotient. You have the adaptability quotient. There's all these kind of things need to come together. But what happens is that we almost highlight one amongst the other when they should be playing in balance.
Wow.
And once we start balancing those things to understand that, am I giving attention to all those things? Because while a woman might be in the space where she's extremely successful, is she really happy? Because that does cause a lot of stress and trauma for her too.
Wow.
And where can she find this? She could find it in a family and in a partner. But we have to move away from that dialogue where I've heard this more than once, where a woman says, I don't need a man.
It's a terrible thing.
And I don't know about that, because I think, yes, you might not need a man from an independence point of view. And I buy that, because I think you're equally competent and you've not been created from the spine of men or from the ribs. So you're on the side of men, so you're equal. But I think that you do need a man because he complements you in some way.
Absolutely.
Especially if you are heterosexual.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because I think our needs as a person goes beyond our cognitive needs.
Yeah. Agreed.
Because you can't be only a cognitive person. You haven't been created as only a cognitive person. You're created as a spiritual being, as a sexual being, as an intellectual being, and you need to make sure that there's balance in those.
Yeah.
right? Don't need a man, you are almost denying the nature of your person.
Yeah.
Right? And when one does that, you then get to a point of saying that, are you in balance and are you in flow?
Wow.
Because you've blocked off a large part of you. And that can come from various things. That can come from trauma, that can come from pain and experiences, and it could be from poor relationships. And men are not saints in relationships, right? And sometimes people just get into the wrong relationships, and women are caused trauma by men. And they block themselves up. And I'm saying that women need to just step one step back and say, I'm okay to be loved. Because I think that part is a big thing for me, is that they've almost said that I can do everything. And what is doing everything? Does it mean that, yes, I buy this thing that, it's better to cry in a Mercedes than on a bicycle, right? And therefore, is everything about things that we can buy and things that we can attain and things that we can achieve? But there's so much more that is deeper than that. And to vibrate at that level will probably influence how you vibrate in your professional, because when you feel loved, you can give love. You can't give something you don't experience. It's in the workplace, you will find very, very powerful women who are highly strung, have zero EQ, and are hated in the workplace. Is that the nature of a creation? I would say no, right? I would think that it's more about if she was in touch with who she is and allows herself to be feminine and allows herself to be balanced spiritually, intellectually, and sexually, then she'd be a balanced human being who has more to give. She has more to give, not only in a professional sense, but as a person, because we are all born teachers. We just don't take up the role, right? Wow. And we're talking a lot about women, but all these kind of things affect the mental health of men.
Wow.
So when we get to men, on the other hand, I think one is about men understanding that it's okay to feel, it's okay to be me, it's okay to not be what society has requested me or wants of me to be. And it's also okay if I have not achieved what my peers or people that I compare myself to have achieved. Why? Because I'm unique. And my journey is unique and my experiences are unique. And I think there are many things that face that. And I think it's about men becoming vulnerable. And that for me, I think is probably the most difficult thing for a man, is to say that I need help, that I can ask for something, that I can accept something being done for me. And yes, men do this very naturally in the authoritative way. It's okay for you to give me my food. It's okay for you to wash and iron my clothes. And those things we accept very easily because we've been inculcated that that's what a man is, and that's the needs of man being provided for. But the moment you tell me to accept something that sits squarely in my responsibility, then I find that difficult. And that's the part where we realize that men lack a certain part of the spiritual quotient. Now, we're not talking religion, we're saying the spirituality to accept that I, as a being, am created in a galaxy of other beings, and there's an exchange between energies. And that exchange of energy means that I must receive certain things in order to be fulfilled so that I can give certain things, right? It also said that my cultural quotient of understanding the diversity of other people and the diversity of sexes and genders, etc., is part of me. My emotional quotient of being in touch with my feelings and allowing me to really feel what I go through and to be okay to speak about that without feeling weak. And for me, that's where the awareness and mental health comes in for men, and how men could progress beyond that is firstly around awareness, and then of course that internal dialogue. And then the biggest thing, which I think, we see in the Wizard of Oz, which most men are, is the lion without the heart, because we lack courage, right? Wow. And although we must never misunderstand a man being strong and a man being courageous.
Wow.
Because strong is something we are taught, and strong is something that's demanded of us. So strong is almost us building this wall around us and pushing everybody aside. Courageous means that I can step beyond my wall and I'm able to enter into a space that makes me uncomfortable. And that's my take on how men need to move into the space of having better mental health.
I'm going to quote that about the lion: strength building the wall, but courage is being able to step beyond the wall. And I'm going to tag you in it online, because I think that is such a beautiful depiction of precisely what that is. And I've never heard that kind of analogy before, but it's almost a shocking to the system. And what you said about, and don't you think it's interesting, Zain? In fighting cultural norms, in fighting the roles that have been prescribed, we very quickly build new norms, new ways of being, new roles, without realizing it. And we just prescribe to that. We just suddenly prescribe to the strong woman. I mean, I'm married. I need my husband. I'm not going to say I don't need a man. And like you said, it's beyond what. And I think we've ascribed or prescribed roles or gender to certain things and to the roles. And that's problematic. And maybe if we fix that, if your husband is great at managing the household, or your partner, your brother, your father, let him thrive in doing that. You know, he could have a job. If mom or the woman is good at managing finances, maybe she's not making the money, but maybe we need to destigmatize and remove the gender from the roles that we like to take up, and rather look at each other in relationships, whether that relationship is a brother-sister relationship, father-daughter, husband and wife. Maybe we need to then look at who is this individual and take it down to that, because I love what you said about going back to who we are at our core. Now, Zain, again, something you said that triggered a thought, and it's something, because I know this about you personally. You and your beautiful late wife, Jolene, have raised 3 incredible boys, and just being around those boys and being around you. You love to serve. You love to cook in your home. What have you done personally to raise 3 such self-aware young men between you and Jolene? And I ask you this because often it's from those personal experiences that we learn from someone. What's your secret?
So I think for us, I think the first thing is that I've done very little in the bigger scheme of things. I think most was done by her. But I think one of the things that we always taught them, there's only one way to stand tall, and that is to have your feet firmly on the ground and your head up in the clouds and never stop dreaming. And I think that that's important, is that there should always be this bigger vision, but there should be a deep sense of humility in what one does, right? And I think the other one is that we've always allowed emotion to be okay. And they know that they can show it, they can feel it, and that was it's always been there. And I think that leniency for boys, to know that it's okay to feel and it's okay to go through things and it's okay to cry, is important. And I think it's better to nurture that than to try to correct it later. And so we've always done that from childhood, where it was completely fine. We spoke very openly about lots of things, so there was never this thing about shame. There was never this thing about body shame. It's not unusual to walk into a house and find that their mother would be in the shower and the boys would walk in, or she'll be lying on the bed and they'll walk in and naked at beyond their 20s and still going to the shower, because there's a mindset, right? It's not it's about, we are family, and people might find that very, very weird, that they'll jump into bed and still, but it's about security. It's about being okay with who I am. It's about knowing who I am and understanding my body and its limits. We taught them very early about the limits of their bodies and, what they're allowed to do, who can touch them, who can't do them. Spoke about,
Yeah.
the story of the birds and the bees and all those kind of things. But also, there was very much the talk about how you treated um, we refer to as somebody else's child.
I love that.
So and that came a lot from their mother because of course she saw it from a female perspective as to how she would have wanted to be treated.
Sure.
And so she instilled that very much in terms of respect and how they would conduct themselves. But I can tell you that they too struggle sometimes, as socially and emotionally aware as they are. There's something in the DNA of men that wants to be strong. And therefore, I'm saying we should never reject our nature, but be aware of our nature because it will take us to where we're created. And unless we're conscious of it, it can derail us, right? So you must allow yourself to be taken there. It puts up the button because your heart will feel the pain. So your heart is the trigger that reminds you. And that's at that point where you make the decision, okay, which way should I be going? If you allow yourself to go deep into it, of where you can't, then of course you're not going to flourish and you're going to get stuck. But if you make a conscious choice that I'm okay to feel this, but I'm going to act in a way so that suffering doesn't become a part of my life, then that would be a different choice. So those are the kind of things we did, and I don't think we were always 100% successful, but I think most of the time we were.
Well, I think every parent feels that, right? That you weren't 100% successful, but being around you and your family, I know, and I can see from the outside just what a beautiful job you've done with the boys. And that's not to say, like you said, that they're not without their struggle. So, Zain, you mentioned just now that your own wife played such a massive role. And I know that with her very, very tragic passing, you even said to me at that point in time, there's so much that she's done. How have you, as a man, coped with stepping up to the plate and fulfilling? I can't say that you fulfill the role because no one and nothing can fulfill that space, but just how you've stepped up as a father into balancing your needs and the needs of your sons, where the gap is just so evident, and from a mental perspective as well.
So I did what a man typically does. He steps up and he puts his needs after the needs of everybody else's. And that's just it. And you're going to autopilot. And that's where men's mental healthness comes in, right? Because often I speak to people and I think I should also be doing that. But it's not a point where I see clients all the time and I have to talk to them, right? So I try as far as possible to do certain things. But I to be honest, I don't always do everything because I just don't have the time. Life is so busy. It's one rat race where especially in my instance, I work, I run a practice, I have to run a house, I have to do the grocery shopping, I have to do the cooking, I have to, now become the nurse. And I've taken, a woman is normally out all these multiple roles, right? She's the teacher, she's the nurse, she's the cook, she's the cleaner, she's everything. And a man just goes to work, right? So now I've done the man's job and I do all the women's job as well, all these multiple roles. And it's quite difficult. I can imagine that I've got a very different situation where I'm quite balanced and I'm able to do things that are outside of a man's comfort zone, right? So and it helps me. But I'm sure there are men who struggle, and I'm writing a book now, A Man's Journey to Motherhood. And
Wow.
I think that in that book, it's for men to understand that somebody else identifies with you, and I want to verbalize what others can't.
Yeah.
So I almost want to vocalize what they're thinking. So just by telling them a story, And I think that, yeah, I'm just doing what I can. And I think I fail in many instances, and I fail myself in many instances. And I think there are many instances where I don't deal with my own mental health, just because I have to get to that point of saying, listen, I don't have time to think about this. I just have to move on. So you go into this autopilot, and you have to, because it's a coping mechanism. And when I say you have to, I mean life demands that of you. But do you really have to? No, you don't, because you're supposed to make time to take out of that cheesecake out of the person, deal with it, right?
Yeah,
So I in my own mind is thinking at some point, if my mind is just in the fridge, I'm going to get to it at some point, not in the purse. But even in the fridge it can go off. So
correct.
so it just takes a little bit longer, but so the time bomb is ticking. It's there.
Listen, Zain, I've seen also how when you would even turn around and say, I'm not dealing with this right now, even to me. But there's that, I think, just being so aware of the fact that it is there and that you do have to deal with it is in itself healing. And I think you do what, as you said, most women do. Women are really good at creating community. We create space for one another. And I think that's why we're so open to the therapy. We just love another community. We'll just add another one to, to the ones we already have. And last two questions before you go. Just from a practical aspect, and being the mental health expert that you are and professional that you are, how do men, it can be 2 or 3 tips practically, with their fear of vulnerability, with the fear of stigma and being labeled, how do they practically just overcome the mental barriers? Because something that we don't have time to discuss is just even the high suicide rates amongst men. How do they also just change that DNA that's been passed down, in terms of you can't be vulnerable, don't display your emotions? Give me 2 practical things that men can do that will just help them switch their mental health journey to be on a more positive path.
Surround themselves by women.
I love that.
So I definitely think that having a female friend helps, because it's somebody who's an external person, who you can talk to, and somebody, and I mean having a friend on a very mature level, right?
Yes.
Where you can, and the female has to be mature too, where she's able to have a conversation and understand what goes on, and give that different lens, because I think men sometimes need a new lens into how they see things. And naturally men don't look at things through an emotive lens, and through a lens that sometimes has a different reasoning. We look at things very black and white. So I think a woman will bring a different colored lens. So I think that would be the first thing, I think. And people see that as, wow, I think it's necessary to look for that, because I think when you're too much in the same flock, you don't necessarily get the fresh lens that you need to be able to shift. The second thing I think that men could do is, I think, seek help. There are many anonymous places. There are many places where men could go without being identified. Nowadays, it can be done online. It can be done through a chatbot. It can be done on TikTok, right? If there's something that bothers you, then you just have to put in the hashtag on TikTok, and you'll get lots of advice around it. And I think sometimes just listening and being inspired will allow you to move beyond the place that you're stuck.
And I think that's
at some point you're going to click over. You just need to keep filling it. You just need to keep, because don't get empty. If you get empty, you're going to dry out. Just keep filling it. Once it overflows, you're going to get into a space of where you're going to know what you need to do. And it's like drumming the advice into yourself all the time. You know the answer, but you have to be reminded, and at some point it's going to click that this far and no more. And I think those would be the top 2 things I do.
And I think both of those things speak to what we as women demonstrate. And I think we've, on some subconscious level, accepted that men don't have the community that we have. Men don't talk. And I think we need to change that narrative. We need to,
Yes.
encourage where we have the male friends. Perhaps it's with your partner, your brother, your father, and encourage them to create that community, because both of those things speak to creating community, be it
But
online
just think, what are
or
those
otherwise.
communities, right? They're
Yeah,
very different. A
yeah,
woman's community goes immediately to, this is how I feel, this is what I experienced, this made me
yes,
crazy, this made me happy.
yeah.
A men's community is everything external. That happened on the news, that happened in the sport, that's it.
Wow.
There's no sharing. It's nothing about me. It's everything about what happens externally to this wall. Where
Wow.
women, it's very much an internal sharing. And I
Internal.
think those narratives change. And therefore, personally, I don't enjoy male gatherings. I find them to be boring. I find them to be, um, prescriptive, and I find them to be non-challenging, and I learn nothing.
Wow.
Where I find that in other circles, I'm far more, if it's mixed, I love mixed groups, because I think there's always the debate and the challenge, and then at least you can raise men's ideas and how men think, and
Yeah.
let women react to that. And often it becomes quite a bun fight as to, why you're saying this and why it should be that. And I instigate it very automatically because I want that conversation to happen. And I think it's necessary. But yeah, just one gender conversations, I think are dull and boring.
Yeah. And I tend to agree with you. Whereas on the other hand, I love engaging with men and getting their perspective, because like you said, it's just
Mhm.
nuanced, a different lens. And that
Of
different lens is what helps you become more whole. And you said something now about instigating in the conversations, because I've seen you do it. And I love that you do it. But your home is literally like Big Mama's house. Everybody's welcome. There's always food on the stove. There's always love and warmth and people in your space, or very frequently people in your space, and you encourage it. Is that by design? And do you think that that is, whether it's by design or natural, and do you think that is what's helped you from a mental health perspective, is having those different people in your space?
I think yes and no. Because there are days I just hope that I just want to be alone,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
Because it does become overwhelming, because in my house it happens not just on a Sunday, it happens every day, the whole day, every day.
yeah,
So I think there are times, but I definitely does bring a very, very powerful dimension to our lives.
yeah,
And I think the space is deliberately created for people to have a safe space. I want it to be an oasis for people to come to, where we can talk about everything, and we do talk about everything. So it often does happen that in that space, there's a lot of dialogue and healing and counseling that happens through conversation.
mm,
So for me, it's very deliberate. And if I feel that somebody's pained or whatever, I would invite them into the space, because
mm,
I believe that they would naturally be healed, and there'll be a discussion where even if they just step out of their world for a little bit,
yeah,
and go into this fantasy world outside that bubble, even though they have to go back into it, after an hour or so. I think just that step out in that breath of fresh air would allow them some difference. And I do that because that's what we were born to do. So, but it's different. I mean, and I listened to you saying that you want to engage men. I think it's because there's a part of you that needs to be shaped and guided. And I think sometimes the
mm,
conversations with men would give you those boundaries and those stops, because if we allowed him to overflow, she'd be out of control, right? So sometimes she needs to be, but that's not how it works. Or you should stop here. Think about that.
yeah.
And that's the pruning that happens. And I think we give each other that.
Yes, we
And
do.
I think that's the beauty of creation, is that you are meant to shift and shape and complement each other. And so while you have the mental wellness and requirements of men, I think that that's influenced by other men, that's influenced by other women, and it goes back to the nature of being social,
Yeah,
and choosing those circles very, very deliberately.
yeah. And being quite intentional about that.
Yeah.
If I don't stop this conversation now, I will keep you for
Yes.
another 2 hours. Doc, it's been a pleasure. and you say you love being around women, you can come to the LDH Sisterhood anytime. We will have you and welcome you with open arms.
As long as you have cake and dessert, I'll come.
We always have cake and dessert, always.
Okay, then I'll gladly come.
There's always food. But thank you so much. Your wisdom is so deeply valued, and I can't wait to share this with the rest of our community.
Great, Kim. Take care.